And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 26. Starting out this week with Compulsion, 1 and a blue, enchantment. Pay 1 and a blue, discard a card, draw a card. Pay 1 and a blue, sacrifice Compulsion, draw a card. I really love this card. You know, this is just one of those cards that you could put in any deck. If I'm making a mono blue deck, for example, I'm probably guaranteed to put this in there. It's just one of those cards that you're never gonna not have use for. You got a card in your hand that isn't really doing you much good, just discard it and draw a new card. Obviously, it's great in any deck where you want to be discarding, where you want to be putting things in your graveyard. Even if at any point this card just becomes useless, you can just sacrifice it to draw a card and it replaces itself. There just really is no reason not to put this in a deck if you can find room for it. Coming in at number 2, Collective Restraint, 3 and a blue enchantment. Has domain. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays X for each creature they control that's attacking you, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. So this is, you know, a Ghostly Prison type effect in blue, but it gets better the more colors you're playing, right? You probably don't want to play this in a mono blue deck because you're only going to have one basic land type and your opponents could just pay 1 to attack you. I mean, that's still okay. It's still just a worse Ghostly Prison. However, if I'm even in just a 3-color deck and I have, say, a swamp, a plains, and a island in play, now my opponents have to pay 3 every time they attack me with a creature. And of course, in a 5-color deck, they might have to spend as much as 5. So it can be really, really great if you're playing a keep off me pillow fort sort of strategy. Coming in at number 3, Congregation at Dawn. Green, green, white, instant. Search your library for up to 3 creature cards, reveal them, then shuffle and put those cards on top in any order. So a tutor for creatures at instant speed, which is fantastic, goes on top of your library, which isn't always great. However, anybody who's got a Gishath deck, I'm sure probably already has this in there. It's an auto included in that deck. I'm about to swing with my Gishath. I search for 3 giant dinosaurs, put them on top of my library, and when I connect, they all end up in play. So sometimes putting those creatures on top of your library can actually be a bonus for you. An Atla Palani deck, it would be great. A Mael of the Anima deck would be great. So like a lot of Naya decks it definitely goes into. But also, I think this card is just great for giving yourself gas later in a game. You know, late in a game, you don't want to be drawing lands or mana rocks off the top of your library. You want to be drawing something with substance. Maybe you want to be drawing a big creature that can close out the game. Maybe you want to draw an Eternal Witness so you can get something valuable out of your graveyard. Maybe you want to be drawing a Reclamation Sage so I can destroy one of my opponent's troublesome artifacts or enchantments. So with Congregation at Dawn, I can just stack those valuable pieces on top of my library so that for the next 3 turns, I know I'm going to be drawing gas. So it can be really great that way as well. Coming in at number 4, Coral Fighters, 1 and a blue, Merfolk Soldier, 1/1. Whenever Coral Fighters attacks and isn't blocked, look at the top card of defending player's library. You may put that card on the bottom of that player's library. So why am I mentioning this seemingly underwhelming card? Well, because I did my 10 abilities that I want Wizards of the Coast to revisit video, and I was surprised how many people commented on that video that they thought Fate Seal was incredibly busted and even oppressive and that it shouldn't be reprinted. So for all of those people out there that think Fate Seal is such a busted, fantastic ability, that's what Coral Fighters is doing. You look at the top card of defending player's library and you can put that on the bottom of the library if you want to. That's what this card is doing. It's doing Fate Seal 1 and you can do it every single turn if you want to. It's a Merfolk, so maybe it goes great in a Merfolk deck, especially one where you can make your Merfolk unblockable. A really great fit in a Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive deck where you can make it unblockable as well. Coming in at number 5, Corpse Dance. 2 and a black, instant, with buyback 2. Return the top creature card of your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature gains haste until end of turn. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. Really powerful effect, obviously. Returning creatures from your graveyard to play. Buyback, also really, really powerful. So if I'm going to do both, this is going to be 5 mana. It's going to be 4 colorless and a black, and I can do it at instant speed. That's what I think really puts this card over the top, is I can do this on the end step and return the top creature card of my graveyard to the battlefield. Of course, Again, this is back in an era where they actually cared about the order of your graveyard, so you do have to know what's on top of your graveyard or manipulate somehow what's on top of your graveyard. And also, exile at the beginning of the next end step. If you have a sack outlet, this doesn't take effect, right? You can just sacrifice. It's not like Unearth where it exiles it in case you put it anywhere else. This is, if it's not on the battlefield, it doesn't affect anything. So you can just bring that creature into play, sacrifice it to some effect, it won't get exiled, and then the next turn you can bring it back. Say if the top creature card of your graveyard is one that you constantly want to be bringing back again and again and again, you can just sacrifice it to avoid the exile effect. So this can be a really powerful card in the right situation. Coming in at number 6, Corrosion. 1 black, red enchantment. Has cumulative upkeep 1. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a rust counter on each artifact target opponent controls, then destroy each artifact with mana value less than or equal to the number of rust counters on it. Artifacts destroyed this way can't be regenerated, and when corrosion leaves the battlefield, remove all rust counters from all permanents. So, a lot going on here. Basically what happens is you put this in play, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you're going to have to both pay the cumulative upkeep and you put the counters on your opponent's artifacts, right? So you're going to do those both at the same time. You stack them however you like. You can get into a situation where if you don't want to pay the upkeep anymore, you can have the other trigger resolve first and then sacrifice it and let it go to the graveyard. But you're going to pick an opponent and you're going to put a rust counter on each artifact that player controls. So if they have 5 artifacts, you're going to put a rust counter on all of them. Then it's going to check if the amount of rust counters is less than or equal to that card's mana value. So the very first time you use this, anything that the opponent controls with a mana value 1 or less is going to get destroyed. Okay, so that's all the soul rings, the mana crypts, all those cheap mana rocks, also all the tokens, right? If your opponent has a smothering tide, let's say they've been going nuts and they got 20 treasure tokens, you're going to put a rust counter on all of those treasure tokens and destroy all of them. I also think this is an interesting card to play in the artifact hate theme that I had talked about in my 10 deck ideas video, where now I can have something like, say, that liquid metal torque that I loved so much from Modern Horizons 2, that I can turn my opponent's creature, for example, into an artifact in response to this trigger and then put a rust counter on it. Probably even could go in possibly again deck where I can use it, and then once the cumulative upkeep gets too high, I can let it go to the graveyard and then bring it back later when maybe my opponent gets that Dockside Extortionist out and gets a whole bunch of treasure tokens that I want to instantly destroy. So can be really great in that deck where I can bring it back into play at instant speed so that immediately on my upkeep I get to use it right away. Super interesting card that I think could definitely go in a few decks. Coming in at number 7, Crackdown. One of my personal favorites, put it in a bunch of decks, 2 and a white enchantment. Non-white creatures with power 3 or greater don't untap during their controller's untap steps. And of course, I do play a lot of white. That's probably why I use this card a lot. If you're in a mono-white deck, it doesn't hurt you at all, right? Because it's only going to affect non-white creatures. And if you're in any deck where you have low-powered creatures, which I've made a bunch of those as well, my Goat Tribal deck, for example, has this card in it, not going to hurt me at all. So it's not going to hurt non-white creatures, and it's not going to hurt creatures with power 2 or less. But everything else isn't going to untap during its controller's untap step. So really powerful effect that could definitely go in some decks. Coming in at number 8, Crypt Incursion. 2 and a black instant. Exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard. You gain 3 life for each card exiled this way. This is just a really great card in any, I mean, you really could put this in any deck because you always want to be putting graveyard hate in your decks, and usually creatures are the biggest issue. I mean, you do have the Kess decks where you want to be exiling everything, but typically recursion, I think, is the big thing you're worried about, and being able to exile creature cards out of players' graveyards at instant speed is fantastic. Also, gaining 3 life for each creature card exiled this way, so exiling 5 creatures nets you 15 life. That's pretty darn good, and I think life gain, as I say, is always underrated in Commander. In particular, though, I think this is great in a mill deck because you absolutely need graveyard hate if you're milling your opponents, because if you're milling a graveyard deck, they're going to be thanking you for it. So you absolutely need cards like this where I mill 30 or 40 cards into my opponent's graveyard, and then now I can exile all those creature cards because they're playing a Marin deck and I don't want them to take advantage of that. And then as an added bonus, I gain like 30 life. So a card like this is fantastic in a deck like that. Coming in at number 9 this week is Crime and Punishment. I'm not sure if I've had a split card on this list before. This might be the first. And there really is some pretty fantastic split cards that I think people could be playing in the format. Crime and Punishment obviously needs to go in an Abzan deck or any deck that has Abzan colors. I think it's fantastic because I think both sides are really, really good in a commander game. The Crime side, 3 white, black sorcery, put target creature or enchantment card in an opponent's graveyard into play under your control. That's definitely a very powerful, very usable effect in a commander game. The Punishment side is also very playable. Black green sorcery, destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with converted mana cost X. So similar to a Pernicious Deed or Gaze of Granite, however, those do X or less. Punishment is only doing exactly X. You know, maybe in a deck where you have lots of tokens, this is good because unlike Pernicious Deed, which is going to do X or less and destroy all your tokens, you can do mana value 2 or mana value 1 and your tokens will survive. I guess it's probably comparable to a Blast Zone in that way, where it's only destroying that exact mana value. But again, you have both sides as an option. So even if the one side doesn't work for you, then the other side probably will. I think it's very unlikely this will ever be a card that's just going to sit in your hand and not find some use. And coming in at number 10 this time is Crumbling Sanctuary, 5 mana artifact. If damage would be dealt to a player, that player exiles that many cards from the top of their library instead. Just a very unique and powerful effect. Again, I always like to mention those cards that have both a unique effect and possibly a very powerful effect. So any damage that gets dealt to any player instead, so the damage is going to be prevented, and then you're going to exile that many cards from your library instead. Any player. So how do you use this card? I mean, I don't think you're going to use it in a milling deck. I mean, first of all, you look at this and you go, okay, well, it's great for milling my opponents or even exiling, which of course is better than milling. But, you know, I don't think so. I mean, if you're going to deal 40 damage to your opponent, that's just going to kill them. Exiling 40 cards from your opponent's library is, you know, in a commander game, that's not so impressive. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe you do use this in a milling deck. I don't know. But where I'm probably using this is in a deck where I want my library to be exiled, right? And of course, if you're in a deck where you have the Labman or Thassa's Oracle as a win con, now this is just going to essentially make it useless for your opponents to attack you because you want to exile your library anyway. So they're just kind of helping you out with your win con. I mean, if you have a Crumbling Sanctuary and a Labman in play, no way your opponents are going to be attacking you, obviously. Also, if you're one of the few people that has an Ormos Archive Keeper deck, this is also a great inclusion there because I think probably you want to have your library disappear. You know, Ormos has that if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, instead put 5+1/+1 counters on Ormos Archive Keeper. So Crumbling Sanctuary is just another way to make your library disappear if that's what you're trying to do with that deck. Very interesting card, very powerful ability, obviously. And I always like to mention cards like that in these videos. But that is it for today. That is 10 more cards that you should be putting in your commander decks. And if you're thinking of purchasing any of these cards, I do have a TCG player link. Please give it a click. It helps support the channel. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.